we could further the vocation of universal fraternity. And that's how this department came to pass. So yeah, I got nominated. I was surprised. I have been involved at the European level of churches in interreligious dialogue, so perhaps that might have been one of the factors. But I got appointed to that a few months ago.
Yes, thanks very much. That was very interesting to learn on that background. So you've been involved at European level, but I think you have a long experience of being involved in interreligious activities. Would you like to tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, well, look, as I said, the focus is primarily on the dialogue. I mean, I'm not 100% sure what my own specific role will be on that. I know what happens with these departments, that generally they have a meeting, perhaps a plenary once a year for a week, where they kind of review updates, get updates on what's going on. They review how things are moving. They give ideas, give suggestions. That's the main, I think, moment. But then throughout the year, perhaps you're consulted on issues, and you can bring things forward. I mean, look, I myself am looking forward to it, because it's something, interreligious dialogue is something I have always believed in very strongly. I had a particular experience when I was younger, which is in 1986. The event, a major event took place in Assisi, which is the medieval town in Italy associated with St. Francis. And this event, 1986, in many ways is kind of a landmark event, a milestone event, because the then Pope John Paul II invited leaders of world religions to come together to pray for peace. 1986, we're just after Chernobyl. There's still a whole lot of talk about the missiles, and people are nervous about peace. So he had this idea, why don't we bring people together to pray for peace? Now, that wasn't without controversy at that time. That there were people also close to him who criticized this gesture. They said, this is syncretism, this is moving into something different. But he persevered, and I was invited to be part of that, in the sense that each of the groups that came from the different religions had to be accompanied. And I was asked, I was in the Focolare movement, and the Focolare movement were asked, would they provide some people who could accompany groups? So I was assigned to the Shintoist group from Japan. So that, of course, was a totally different world for me. I had no sense of it. And it was extraordinarily interesting to be with them. But the day itself, it was October and 1986. The day itself was an extraordinary day, and I just maybe tell you a little bit about it, because it remains as a moment. Each of the religions were assigned a place in the town, and maybe a church or a building, and each separate religion, first and foremost, had their own ritual moment of prayer, distinctly in their own tradition, completely. And that, number one, was very powerful. But then at a certain point, all of them we did begin in a particular place altogether first. Then we had the distinct moments of religions. But then what happened was, like little streams running into a river, all the different groups from the various parts of the city, and it's really a town, from the town, started coming together along the roads into the main square. And that was extraordinarily moving in itself. Here we were all together, moving together into a common square, common space. And there was a podium, and all the religious leaders were on top. Then there was a podium that each one could go up and say their prayer distinctly, and then go back again while the others listened with great reverence. And it was extremely moving. And it concluded with a release of doves for peace, a symbol of peace. But what was very moving was, the day was October. It should have been warm, but it wasn't. It was actually a cold day, and it was overcast, unusual for Italy. And just as the doves were being released at the conclusion of the whole day, the clouds opened up, and this wonderful sunshine enveloped all of us who were present. And I think it was like a little symbol for us. There is the one God who is the Father of all, embracing everybody. And I think that remained. Subsequently, many people commented on that event, because in some ways for the Catholic Church, but then also for other churches, it was like an icon, a picture of what the Second Vatican Council wanted to say, that we need to be in dialogue. We're never going to have a new world, a different world, unless we do it together, collaborate with one another. So that for me began, a whole load of different initiatives I was involved in, and through the Focolare movement, involved in various seminars. I've been to India, involved in some dialogue with Hindus. And in Dublin, I was part of the Three Faiths Forum for many years, where we met regularly with the chief rabbi, with members of the Islamic community, leaders of the Islamic community, and then members of the Christian churches. And like we build up a network of relationships together. So yeah, all of that kind of gave me a certain sense of the significance and importance of interreligious dialogue.
That's fantastic, Brandon. Thanks very much. Well, just to finish, I mean, we're just considering lots of issues in Northern Ireland, and we wonder, would you like to, give any suggestions to us about how people from Ireland, North and South, might contribute more to interreligious dialogue, especially in the context that we're living in of racism and polarization?
Yes, well, at this stage, after so many years of interreligious dialogue, I think certain clarifications are coming out, or at least even useful, clear points. And one is that, there are various types of dialogue. And the first one that should never be underestimated is the dialogue of life. We all have neighbors, we have people in our workplace, we have people we meet in the shops, we have people, uh, we should never underestimate the value of that dialogue. A word, a greeting, an exchange, it already does a lot. And people, get just to recognize that there is another way of reacting to people who are different to me already by the simple daily actions of our own lives. If we can exhibit a witness to that, I know this morning I was at another meeting this morning earlier on in the city, and we were just saying that in this case it was a Christian leaders meeting, but we were just saying with the rise of racism and people are saying even sectarianism, and somebody was just saying they hadn't experienced that before as much as in recent times again, that even just our coming together, sharing our lives, because that's all we do. We have a breakfast together every now and again. Those simple things of a dialogue of life are not to be underestimated. But then there is the other dialogue, the dialogue of cooperation, collaboration, action together. And again, look, these are all gestures we can all do, small or large, in our homes or in our roads or networks. I know, for instance, after the Twin Tower tragedy, 9/11 tragedy in Dublin, we organised a whole prayer gathering event for peace, and I know it had great resonance at the time. During COVID, I remember I made a little video with religious leaders here of the different traditions. And yeah, it was a simple gesture, but just to encourage people, we put it out together as a video we did together. So, again, I know in England, perhaps where this is quite developed, very often they can provide services to help smaller communities that feel at time a bit isolated or feel a bit that they haven't got access as easily to social services, public services, or just simply that they don't have the know-how to maybe go about some of these things, and that some initiatives can help, whereby members of religions can help each other, especially those religions that are more numerous, perhaps could help those that are maybe less numerous. Yeah. And then you move up. Yeah, I mean, you have what's called the dialogue of religious experience, and that's being perhaps valued more now. Obviously, we all have a tradition that we come from, and we all have perhaps take it for granted because we live in the tradition, but in fact we all have experience inside us with regard to our scriptures, with regard to our daily lives, and maybe we need to open up opportunities to share about that. Here I can remember the Three Faith Forum in Dublin. We used to arrange seminars for students, and it was interesting. I remember we did one on pilgrimage and we did one on revelation. And It was good because, for instance, my own students for whom Revelation was a little bit abstract, but for instance, when they were hearing Muslims speak about Revelation, Jews speak about Revelation, well, it began to click. Well, what's my understanding of Revelation? So, in a paradoxical way, the more we engage with one another, the more authentically we understand our own tradition as well. So, I think the whole world of formation, and here perhaps we could say education, is an opportunity for us to promote this exchange in religious education. It's true to say that, of course, we need to be mindful of the fact that we need to know our own traditions. Yeah, that's true too. So these are things, obviously, at the academic level, colleges, universities can get involved in that. That's something we should always be encouraging as well. So yeah, anyway, these are ways I think we can try and help each other in promoting this culture that tries to, I think, work against the rise of racism. That it don't underestimate the small everyday ways.
Well, thank you very much indeed for being with us this evening. It's great for us to know that we have somebody from our part of the world in such a central key place. If there's anything we can do, you can give us a shout. We'd be happy to help in any way. I think I can say that.
Thank you. No, thanks. And thanks for the prayers. Yeah.
So you'll stay with us for a little while?
Yes, I should be able to stay for a while. Yeah.
Okay, thanks very much. Well, I'm going to hand over to Edward, I think, now.
Thanks, Vanessa. And I'm delighted that the technology is working. I was expecting to have some glitches, and we haven't had any yet. So, but that's not to say they're not to come. And I just want to check with Navid in London that we've no questions coming in on the chat box. So I'm hoping that that's all okay.
Questions yet, but I'll let you know.
Yeah, thanks, Navid. Any questions before we move on? Any questions for Bishop Brendan? Everybody content that we move on. And we are slipping a little bit behind, so I'm keen to move on quite fast. And we'll go to Naomi first. And Naomi, if you want to sit here, we can then, Camera will then be able to pick you up. Okay. So Juanita's given a really good introduction, which is much better than I could have done, thankfully. And yeah, Naomi's, it's always great to have Naomi and Peter because they're such wonderful supporters of the Interfaith Forum in different ways. And as Juanita said, Naomi is no stranger to folk in Northern Ireland through our broadcast work as well. Over to you, Naomi, for your thoughts.
Thank you very much. I'm hoping my phone doesn't die. Last time I spoke here, I had a tiny notebook and I couldn't read my writing, so I thought this time I'll put it on my phone, and now I don't think I can see my own thing. So hopefully I'll not get lost. So I think one of the things, just about the current context that we're living in, I think we're living in unprecedented times. I think, if anything heard yesterday, the president of the largest, most powerful country in the world was talking about Sharia law taking over London. I'm going to London on Monday, so if I see Sharia law, I'll take a picture of it and I'll save it and post it on Facebook. But this kind of dialogue and nonsense is just, these fairy stories are just everywhere. We had the march on 2 weeks ago, 13th, where we had people openly talking about censoring non-Christian religions in the UK on an open stage, with thousands of people there. So I think we're living in unprecedented times, not in politics, but just the dialogue that has been normalised. And we've also seen the most horrific increase in xenophobia and Islamophobia and racism, including here on the streets of Northern Ireland. And we saw that last summer, but I think we've seen that in a different form over the past year, not only in Ballymena, but it's kind of become an everyday normal for Northern Ireland, and for many maybe not beyond the news. It's not always covered on the news, but For many not on that online, chronically online space, they might not be aware about how common it is and the level of fear that's currently in not just Muslim communities, but minority communities across Northern Ireland and the rest of the UK and Ireland at the moment. And this kind of has created this fear, this mistrust, this kind of us and them dialogue, which I think we really, really need to rapidly move away from. In terms of faith, my faith, Islam, it calls us to be agents of peace. It calls us not only to care for our own communities, like you'd hear some of Mr. Trump would think, but it actually calls us to promote justice and reconciliation in society at large. One of the verses in the Quran, it says, it's an example of this: the servants of the most merciful are those who walk upon the earth humbly, and when the ignorant address them, they say words of peace. And that's what we as Muslims are called to do. And as faith communities at large, we also have this duty. It's not just it's a calling to act responsibly, to speak responsibly, to challenge some of these narratives that have become widespread, and to build social cohesion between communities. And that's not just about fancy words. It's not about saying nice things and me coming here and saying. It's also about action. What I was talking about on Sunday night, I read this thing on Facebook, and I'm going to read it to you as well. And it's talking about how faith has to be not just about words, but action. And it's just a small part of it. Show me in how you treat people who have nothing to offer you. How you speak up when it's uncomfortable and stand firm when silence is easy. Don't tell me what you believe. Live it. And that's the challenge for all of us, whether we have faith or not, that we are actually acting on our fancy words. As a community, the Muslim community has been part of the Interfaith Forum since its conception. We have been here for over 100 years. People don't realise that, in small numbers, but growing in the last 20 years, in the last 10 years in particular. And we have constantly participated. Uncle here has participated at many events, and many others in our community have committed to this kind of interfaith dialogues and discussions. And it's not just here in Northern Ireland, of course, across Ireland, and as you heard earlier, and also across the rest of the UK. There's lots of anti-racism work, campaigns, refugee support, civil rights advocacy, partnering with churches, partnering with gurdwaras, with synagogues, whether it's food banks, anti-hate campaigns, community cohesion, just those shared dinners, shared iftars. And it's that sort of what Bishop was saying there, and those everyday practical acts that peacemaking that we build together. But as a Muslim, I have to say there is a particular concern for us. Muslim voices are often tokenized in these kind of debates, and our contributions are often overlooked because there is those narratives that, I saw a well-meaning post on Facebook, again, chronically online, on Facebook about how just reacting to the current debate and talking about how Jesus calls Christians to love their enemies. And I was just thinking, but we are not your enemies. That language itself is actually problematic. We as Muslims are not talking about Christians or Jews or Hindus or Sikhs as our enemies. This is our community. So I think we need to be careful, even when we're talking about peacemaking, about the language that we use about one another and the assumptions that we're bringing to the table. Also, as a post-Christian society, essentially the UK, Northern Ireland maybe less so, but certainly wider UK and Ireland, we're seeing increasing challenges with people of faith. So if you're coming in a secular sort of society with your faith on your sleeve or on your head, as in my case, it can be really difficult to be authentically faithful to your tradition. Being authentically Islamic can be challenging, and assumptions are often made about your intentions. You're doing this because you want to convert me, rather than because this is how we should be having these interactions. And I think there's always a challenge in terms of faith and peace building. And just talking about the silent majority, I do believe that most people in Northern Ireland and most people in the UK and most people in Ireland and most people in Europe and most people in America just ultimately want to get on with their lives and want to get on with their neighbours. But I do feel we're at a critical juncture where silence is no longer an option. It allows divisive voices to dominate rather than the rest of us. you know, there's a verse, another verse, another hadith that says, whoever among you sees an evil action, let him change it with his hand, if he cannot with his tongue, and if he cannot with his heart, and that is the weakest of faith. And I think it's a challenge not just for us as Muslims, but for all people of all faiths to challenge what we see. And whether that's speaking up against genocide, as we've seen the breakdown of international law and order at the moment, you know, over 100 people are being killed daily in Gaza alone. There's Sudan, there's Congo, there's so many other conflicts across the world. Whether that's speaking up against war, which is like a big thing, or just on that local, talking to your neighbours, supporting your neighbours, volunteering in your community, just modelling not only unity but also justice. Those, you know, those are big things. There's small things as well. Just when I was writing the notes, this morning I went for a walk just on the road campus, and I get up some steps in before I sit down to work because I work from home. And a lady just came up to me and said, "Are you walking alone?" I said, "Yeah, you know, what's going on?" But she just wanted to warn me that there was someone down, you know, dodgy character who was drinking down at the bridge and not to go past on their own because she just come past. Just a little thing to think about someone else. A couple of days ago, I was at Lidl. I couldn't find a pound coin, and someone just walked up to me and gave me a pound coin. You know, just said, don't worry about it." You know, these. I mean, I want to stand in there and want to cry because someone's just been so nice, just a random stranger. But these little things often mean a lot more. And if you listen to my thought for the day last Friday, I said there's 2 other examples. But I think these are these little things. Just it's what makes us. It's what makes us a society. So yeah, it's about those everyday interactions, but also not staying silent on injustice, on human dignity and peace, because that matters. That silence that I have heard about or not heard, that silence speaks volumes. When I have seen people that I know be murdered in the most grotesque way, and people can't even say, you know, call for peace, call for ceasefire, I find that very, very hard to reconcile. And when there's been attacks on homes and people are talking about legitimate concerns and you know, there is absolute issues within society and housing and all this, but if you can't speak out for your neighbours, if you can't speak out for international law, when are you going to speak out? So just, sorry, I'll just stay with the phone, is it locks itself? So just another verse in front, which is, "Do not let hatred of other people prevent you from being just. Be just, for that is closer to God's consciousness." Peace requires courage, persistence, and daily action, but it also requires us to speak up for justice and what's right. I believe that faith communities, and Islam is just one of the faith communities here, are uniquely positioned to serve as bridges, as healers, and peacemakers. For me as a Muslim, that means demonstrating Islam's message of mercy, justice, and shared humanity in an increasingly polarized world. But by acting together, engaging society, and inspiring others, we can all model a vision of peace rooted in faith and universal.
Just trying to improve the sound a little bit for the Zoom call. And I think I'm hoping that we've managed to do that. What struck me, and I was distracted in the middle of that, what struck me was there was a lot of similarity between what he was saying and what Bishop Brendan was saying, and particularly, you know, Bishop Brendan talked about the dialogue of life, dialogue of living, you know, and your reference to just small random acts of kindness, you know, and I think, you know, that's you know, quite powerful in terms of, you know, those little small things can be, you know, incredibly meaningful. But the challenges remain. The challenges in terms of how do we address the current situation in the world? What do we say? What do we do? What's, you know? So that's the big question I think I have in my mind at the moment. I just want to check with Naomi in case there's anybody coming through in the chat box with questions. I think we should see them on the screen if they do come through, but I haven't seen anything.
No current questions. Thank you.
Anybody in the audience want to ask anything or say anything? Okay, we bang on straight on into Peter. And again, Juanita has given you a wonderful introduction introduction. So let's have your wonderful thoughts.
She has, and Naomi as well, and Brendan before it. And just for the record, I think what the Interfaith Forum does and has done for a number of years now is just wonderful. It's great to see you doing so many things in this space as well as other spaces. Such an important thing for us to do and be part of in this part of the world. I'm going to have a rant to start with. Is that okay? Because I'm going to pick up on what has been said so far, including by Naomi and others. And I'm going to apologize to anybody from the United States when I go up on my rant. I love America. I think it's probably the best country in the world. I was there last year, trying to work out how often it'd been, and lost count after about 20 times. Being there so often. And the American people are wonderful people. And one of the things that I always come across when I talk to Americans, all Americans, is they have a spirit of generosity about them. Their attitude to life and each other just has a spirit of generosity. And you're going to make America great again, Ed, when you rediscover that spirit of generosity, because it's not there at the minute between each other in America, never mind the rest of the world. The world is a better place when America has that spirit. And I just have concerns around where we are at the minute. And I don't think it's going to get better over the next 2 or 3 or 4 years. And I think there are going to be big challenges. I listened to that memorial service. I have to say I'd never heard of Charlie Kirk before he got killed, and what a dreadful thing it was that he was killed. It's just awful. But I listened to that memorial service, and what struck me was I was listening to a form of Christian nationalism that was not consistent with what I interpreted in the United States as the spirit of generosity that America has. And amongst all of the loud voices, the voice that was in my head constantly was a gentler voice. If you remember from 8 or 9 months ago, was it Bishop Budd, the bishop in America, who said, "Mr. President, have mercy. People are scared now." And she went on to talk about the LGBT community, or the people who had the lower end jobs who were scared now about what would happen. And it seemed to me that was a voice that was more consistent with what Christianity is than what we heard in that rally a couple of nights ago. Her voice was more the voice of the old, from a Christian perspective, correct me if I get any of this wrong, the old Jewish scholars, the socialist Jewish scholars from a couple of thousand years ago, who talked about social justice as a core part of what Christianity was about. Isaiah, Jeremiah, they were talking about what I consider really the Christian faith is about, the social justice, looking out for others, than those loud voices were. And I don't think that's going to get much better over the next 2 or 3 years, because we're in an election cycle with midterms in America in 12 months. In 18 months here, we've got council elections and assembly elections. You've got council elections across the water in May 27 and a Westminster election 28. And unfortunately, that blend of politics and Christian nationalism, I hope that's not offending anybody, plays in terms of our politics in this part of the world. We're getting it across when I'm sorry, I am tired of turning on the news at 7 o'clock of an evening to hear President Trump pontificating about whatever comes next, as in the United Nations and Sharia law or anything else. I just wish we could move on from that, but we're not going to over the next 2 or 3 years, because that plays in the media. And I suspect part of the reason it plays is because I think President Trump has a knack of touching some issues that resonate with people, whether it be migration or whether it be the pronouns and the woke agenda around the men and women's sports and so on. It touches something. And I think there is a dialogue to be had within all faiths about the response to that. I think Naomi was absolutely right. We need to be a lot more vocal in our response to that, but we also need a conversation about where Trump is touching on things that are really relevant to to have a wider conversation about a rational response to where he's at with it. But I get the sense, sorry, because America is such a great country. I'm not sure he does speak for the majority of people. Certainly hope he doesn't, because it's not the image, it's not the language that will make America great again. That spirit of generosity that we have been created for so long. I am involved, as Benita said, with the Remembering Shelter Needs charity. One of the things I say to people at sessions that we do is, have you heard of Srebrenica? And I'm talking, obviously, just looking at you to a well-informed audience here, so most of you will have heard of Srebrenica. But most of the people I'm talking to haven't heard of Srebrenica. They say, what is it? Where was it? What happened? And for those you here who haven't, it happened 30 years ago this year in Bosnia at the end of the Bosnian War. Over a 2-week period, just under 8,500 people from a Muslim background were killed, as in what the United Nations now recognizes as a genocide in the northeast part of Bosnia. It was part of an ethnic cleansing program by Bosnian Serbs to clear the land of people from other faiths, particularly Bosnian Muslim, Bosnian Croat Catholic faith, because they wanted that land more to be Bosnian Serb, ultimately trying to link up with Serbia. So 30 years ago, in the heart of Europe, when people in July 1995 were flying over to go on holiday to Greece or to Turkey, or maybe a couple of 100 miles away in Italy, sunbathing on holiday in July 1995, just under 8,500 Muslims were murdered because of their ethnicity or their faith. They were killed by Christians. Not because they were Christians, but they were killed by Christians. And the question I ask the people all the time is, for those that haven't heard of that, you think you'd have heard of that if 30 years ago in the heart of Europe, 8,500 Christians had been killed by Muslims? And I think the answer in my mind is yes, we would have heard about that repeatedly. It would be part of our common knowledge of our DNA, in a sense, in this part of the world. And the question, which is a complex question with maybe complex answers, is why haven't we heard about it 30 years ago? Most people haven't heard about it 30 years ago. And I think there's a discussion to be had, which is partly about media and partly about other things that is relevant to faith backgrounds as well, about why we haven't heard about it. What we do in the charity is we look at the standard model of journey to genocide. And in Northern Ireland, we never had genocide. We just didn't get as far as that. But we did have things in that step-by-step model around polarization, classifying others, around use of dehumanizing language, and one or two other bits and pieces. And what Stanton talks about when he talks about those things, are these things familiar? About how symbols are used, for example. So when we go back into the 70s and 80s, how were symbols used here to differentiate communities in the way that they were in Bosnia to differentiate communities as one of the steps towards genocide? He would talk about how we classify people, how there are systems created to keep people apart. He talks about things around education and keeping people apart. So one side do certain things and the other side do certain things, or go to certain schools, and the other side don't go to certain schools. Does that sound a little bit familiar for us in Northern Ireland? He talks about how there are different cultural norms that different people from different backgrounds are encouraged. Part of the step towards genocide to actually participate in different ways in cultural activities, part of the them and us attitude that people would have. And he talks about how one can counter some of that stuff. How one can counter some of that stuff is around maintaining values, around making sure that there is proper integration, that relationships are developed between communities, that institutionally people aren't allowed to be separate, and a range of other things as part of the counter of that movement towards genocide. But think what that means for us is real challenges in an era where it's not just about what's happening in America, but what's happening elsewhere. We do have a rise of intolerance, I think, where we're talking at each other rather than with each other. And Naomi talked about the number of amount of racism in the city. The statistics for last year showed that there were more racist incidents and more racist crimes that were hate-related, race-related hate crime and incidents than all of the other hate categories put together. So in Northern Ireland, we have more race hate incidents, race hate crimes than everything else, whether it be sectarian or gender or disability focused or any of the other Section 75 categories. And when you think of our population and the proportions of our population, that really makes it very stark that there were more race hate incidents than there were all of the other categories put together. So I think we have huge challenges currently, but that is accelerated or accentuated whenever in the news every night we hear some of the things that we hear. And that gives, I think, from America, gives an impetus to the sort of politics and blend with faith that gives an impetus to people in GB and reform, as well as an impetus to people here to talk in the same sort of language and raise the same sort of issues. What do we do about it is the question, of course, and I think what we do about it are these sort of meetings, these sort of dialogues, but I think also faith, people from different religious backgrounds need to find a much stronger voice to counter some of this. I want to hear the mosques, the synagogues, the churches, and those leaders say things publicly about the things that we hear. I haven't heard many people from faith backgrounds talk about those race hate incidents and crime. I haven't heard many people talk about culture wars and whether culture wars in dividing us up as society and communities is a good thing or a bad thing, and I assume most people would say they're bad. I haven't heard those voices enough, and I think that leadership now more than ever is needed. Bishop Budd did that, although she was vilified about it, and I haven't heard her saying much since then. Maybe she's just thought better of some of the things that she believes in, or maybe she's just not given the airtime because it's not as interesting as hearing President Trump speak in the way that he speaks in others as well. But we need to find a voice. I just whizzed.
No, that's good. That's good. Okay.
Okay, time wise.
Yep.
Or are you saying that's good as in shut up?
No, you're okay. Keep going. Yep.
Well, I whizzed through some of this stuff, but I just think we're in it. Now be right. We're in a moment. I don't think this moment is past, and I don't think this moment is going to pass with the odd voice coming through. I think we need to really reflect well in sessions like this about how we deal with that. The other thing, and I'm reluctant to say this, but I'm going to say it. I hear some of the stuff coming. I'm sorry, I'm going to pick. I hear some of the stuff, not just in the United States, but others. And I think back to the 19th century. And I think back to imperialist rhetoric in the 19th century. So whenever you hear, I suspect there is close to ethnic cleansing happening like that. If not genocide. It's a really hard judgment, and I would all, from a Sheridan's perspective, you're always really careful about calling genocide because it's such a big word to use. But I think about that and the video. Do you remember the video about the seaside properties and let's have hotels, and people were retweeting these videos? I'm thinking, I wonder if that's pretty similar to what language would have been used in 19th century America, when some people thought, there's land over there that would make good farming land. I think we'll have that. Or in 19th century Russia, when Russia was expanding into the stands because of the land and took over a lot of the stand When I hear things around Greenland and Canada, security, you need to have these countries for security reasons. Is that the sort of thing that Britain was saying in India in the 19th century? We need to take over more land to secure our interests and to create peace in society. And when I see ships being blown up for drug trafficking, which is appalling, of course, I wonder if that was the sort of thing that happened during the Opium Wars in the 19th century, when Britain, who were actually facilitating drugs going from India to China, and blew up a lot of ships. I wonder if that's the sort of thing that happened in the 19th century during the Opium Wars. We're in a place where almost these things are being normalized, that were part of our history 150 years ago. And I worry about where this is going. Because what happened at the end of the 19th century was the 20th century, and the 20th century wasn't a good century for peace and reconciliation. Right, I'm gonna stop there.
Wonderful. Naomi, come and join us here, because we move towards a bit of a discussion. There are a lot of very interesting points that have been raised, and we want to explore some of them, I think. First of all, Navi, can I check if there are anything coming through in the chat box?
No questions yet, Edwin. Thank you.
Anybody in the room here want to raise anything straight away? Yes,
There was just something you mentioned actually about I don't know, it was an intentional comparison of Bishop Buddy and Charlie Kirk. I was reading something about each religious education, and I remember when she made that speech, and obviously I heard about Charlie Kirk recently as far as was, but I found that sort of culture in America of being a good boy Christian, of kind of speaking at rather than with, the tying politics too much with religion, but how Bishop Buddy, as opposed to speaking at Mr. Trump, spoke with a community that she knew very well. I think it really drew in that attention to a voice of that faith as a voice of dialogue. I really appreciated that sort of, whether it was intentional or not, that comparison or contrast.
I'm just wondering, now, did people on the Zoom call hear that?
It would be helpful to repeat it if you don't mind.
I'm not going to try to.
No, I was just saying my name is Conor McGinnis. I'm a teacher for religious education in a school in Belfast, and I was just drawing. I think your name. Sorry, Peter. Peter, I just was drawing into something that Peter said about a comparison between Charlie Kirk and Bishop Buddy about her speech that she made to President Trump about to be merciful towards immigrants and members of the LGBTQ plus community. Just make that comparison with how Charlie Kirk, as horrible as death was, as great a speaker as he was very much someone who spoke at and was quite a good boy Christian, one who could be tied to politics too closely with religion, but how Bishop Buddy spoke with even someone she didn't agree with, and I think it just drew the attention towards a voice of faith, rather, is a voice of dialogue. That's all I wanted to mark my appreciation of that.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Any other comments or questions from the floor? Yes, George.
Yes. Thank you very much. Two things. One, about think of Peter's point about Bishop Budd. Of course, Bishop Budd was actually speaking very much in the context of a service, which was specifically to address the person when the president was there and to address her. Actually, something which did not come across in a lot of the coverage was how theologically grounded her sermon was. The remarks proposed at the end were very much geared into her general religious reflection. So I also can't just say that my American friends I'm very fond of who are deeply distressed by everything that's happened, said afterwards that my friend Stacey said, I'm an atheist, but now I feel I want to go to church and support them, as these are the people who are supporting ethical living. And the point was also Bishop Bud was speaking at the time, politicians were not. And just one other point was that what you would say about the churches in the and religious groups need to speak out is true, but I feel I should say that one good example recently, which was given by Archbishop John McDowell when he after the disgraceful incident of the migrants being burned, boat being burned, he spoke up very strongly at once, and I didn't hear any political leaders doing it. So I think that should be, said. I just want to say, Naomi, I'm very interested in all you have to say. Are there specific things you would like to see students doing, or that say university chaplaincies should be encouraging students to do to meet other people?
Universities are a good one because they are a meeting point for people of different faiths. We often have a lot of international students, and a lot of our international students come from different faith backgrounds, particularly Muslim backgrounds. So, I guess anything that brings, I know there is various programs for welcoming international students. So sometimes they're just go and have pizza, go to the cinema. Maybe, there's opportunities to have discussions of that as well. But, bear in mind, so the international students also bring international politics. And we have many, many local people from different faith backgrounds. And I think that, certainly when I was at Queen's, we used to have quite robust evenings, sometimes with the Islamic Student Society and other groups. I don't know if that happens anymore. I'm out of the loop. But I definitely think those are, I guess what Charlie Kirk did, he brought people together, whether you love them or loathe them, he did bring people together and have discussions. There are debate societies, these things. I don't really like debates as a way of talking about different faiths because I think that puts people against each other. But maybe framing it in a different way, you're bringing people from different backgrounds to have a friendly discussion, but to agree to disagree rather than to win a debate. I think the focus of debating while it's interesting is ultimately to win. And I think we need to change how we discuss. It's not about winning, it's about listening. I want to get my opinion, even if I disagree with you. And I've had discussions with people on the far right. I've had discussions with people who are out protesting against, and ultimately we find things we agree on. And we may completely disagree on key things, but also we're all human, and there is a common ground with everyone. Somewhere. I think it's partly sorry to get America. I didn't apologize. You're very apologetic. I didn't apologize. Still to American or any other American. But I think we almost have a comic book view of the world. There are villains and there are heroes, and there is good and there is bad. And we even heard with that Charlie Kirk stuff, Charlie Kirk funeral, some of the conversation, darkness, light. Everybody has shades of grey. Everybody has black, everyone has white. There are things that I'm wrong about. There's things that I'm right about. Of course, I would say I'm usually right. But, many people will say, no, you're usually wrong. But all of us have shades of grey. And that's where we can come together and agree on. And we will always have things we disagree on. But I think it's always that need to prove ourselves right, to be the correct one. Move away from that. But in terms of universities, having a space to do that, I think would be very useful.
So, guys, it prompts me the question about education and how we provide education for migrants. Prompts me to think about a conversation I had this afternoon, actually in this room. And this isn't a faith issue. The family concerned are Christian, but they're Iranian Christians. They, mother and two boys arrived about a year ago, maybe a little bit over a year ago. They very quickly got their status, like unbelievably quickly. Arya, the oldest son, is 21, and he's a really good pianist, like concert standard pianist. with really good English. He has been accepted into Queen's to do a course on sound technology in Queen's. So he's settled here. His mother got a job in M&S, Marks and Spencer, and then tried to get his younger brother into school to do GCSEs because of their journey across Europe. His education was disrupted. He doesn't have any qualifications that are transferable. He needs to get GCSEs. He's over 18. And that means that none of the post-primary schools in Northern Ireland will accept him because he's over 18. So his only option is to look at the further education colleges. And there are no further education colleges that can offer him maths and science, which is what he needs to do. So he has had to move to London to get GCSEs in the subjects that he wants. And it's just, you know, that's just one example, but across the board, there are so many horrendous examples that migrants are facing when they come here. Sorry, that was my rant. Yeah, it was just sort of top of my head because of the conversation I had with Aria this afternoon. And as I say, that family is a Christian family. You know, it's not a faith issue particularly. What is a faith issue, though, is Peter mentioned the US states statistics. And what that masks is that a lot of those attacks are clearly Islamophobic and very explicitly Islamophobic. And that's increasing. And I find it quite appalling when I'm talking to people who are educated, well informed, would consider themselves to be community minded, promoting community relations. But if I can tell a story of a minister I was speaking to just within the past couple of days, he said to me, he said, "You're Baha'i, aren't you?" I said, "Yeah, I'm Baha'i." He said, "Do Baha'is have difficulties in Iran?" I said, "Yeah, they have difficulties. You know, farmers lose their land, burial grounds are bulldozed over, there are Baha'is in prison." You know, I gave him a catalogue, and there is a catalogue. And then he said to me, "Does that not make you think about Islam being a peaceful religion?" And I said to him, "No, it doesn't. You know, we in Northern Ireland, more than anywhere, know that there are clerics that promote violence and that there are clerics that attach themselves to paramilitary organizations. That doesn't invalidate Christianity. And in the same way, you know, if you have, and the other thing I said to him is, I've had so much experience over the years of wonderful Muslims who demonstrate their faith in a peaceful way. So why would I? You know, but it's this, there is, I feel, in the encounters that I'm having, I feel that an increasing level of Islamophobia that's really very worrying. Anyway, I got 2 rants now. And look at the audience. And maybe there's somebody in the Zoom call as well that wants to come in.
We have a question from Colin, and I'll read this more or less verbatim. Can we identify those issues common to all which are of concern, including climate change or political misleadership and many others which have the propensity to destroy us all, and then to tackle the great divide between churches, etc., and the general secular society? So this would really require a forthright and agreed engagement with the media, or, you know, are we asking too much for this?
Good. Thanks for that, Navi. I'm going to go, before we tackle that and try to answer it, I'm going to go to Ed because Peter has been referring to America a lot and he's been apologizing. Yes, that's true. He's been apologizing to Ed profusely because Ed is our representative of America in the room. So, yeah, no, go ahead.
I'm very good. I don't know if Bishop Leahy is still with us too, but I'm just grateful for all the contributions and Maybe just to pick up Edwin on what you were saying there too, because for me it has been quite challenging being kind of an American. And there are a lot of Americans who come here, but groups that come and visit, and in my work in Clonard Monastery, they want to hear something of the peace work that took place there. And I really struggle because the people that I'm meeting from America that are coming here are just like you were saying, Peter, thankfully there do seem to be a lot of good people in America, and with hearts, like passionate hearts for reconciliation, peace, and justice, and are at a loss at the moment. And I think, Edwin, what you were saying about that question about Islam, for me, it's kind of very similar, because a lot of, for me, like if you were making a judgment on Christianity or based off of a lot of what we would see coming out of America, and some of the comments that were made, that like I don't want to necessarily judge anyone, but at the same time, it's an important reminder. I mean, Naomi, when you were sharing in your talk, I mean, it was so beautiful to hear what you were sharing about Islam. You know, like, and I think back to the night you were here with Rabbi Cal, and even what he was sharing about Judaism. And then I think of, you know, hopefully that there are such richness in our faith traditions. Do we have challenges and even things that are hard? I mean, yeah, of course, you know, of course we do. Like Naomi, I've never really thought of it, but I often like that idea to love your enemies. You know, that's like a part of. I often I found myself defending that, like saying, like there's this thing to even love your enemies, and then would always stop and say, but I don't really want to think that I actually have enemies. Like I wouldn't hope that we wouldn't have enemies. I can see now in our situation in the world where you could perhaps label someone an enemy, but if we're just making a general kind of us, them, and just because they're different from us, all of a sudden they're an enemy, as opposed to I much prefer my neighbor. Like that idea, love your neighbor. Well, how do you love your neighbor? This is something I learned from Father Jerry Reynolds, because he felt he was on one side of the wall, his neighbor was on the other side of the wall. He knows he's meant to love his neighbor, but if you don't meet your neighbor, it's very hard to love someone if you never meet them. And for him, he just thought, I'm going to go and meet my neighbor. And therefore, that's read from all of what you're saying, Bishop Leahy, starting out with the dialogue of life. I mean, there is something so important. And the one challenge around that is that I sometimes struggle, that my fear is that some people just seem like they don't care, that they want to meet their neighbor, but they don't want to hear something about their neighbor. And for me, that's the saddest part of it, or that they feel, you know, that sort of apathy to our neighbor is, I don't know how, you know, I would hope in our faith traditions that the inspiration would be that you want to learn about your neighbor. And I think maybe that's going back to what Edwin was saying in education, that we really have to just try to encourage that opportunity to want to know more about our neighbor. You talked about, Naomi, I think you said about not winning arguments or something about listening, like how important just wanting to listen to someone else's story is. The last thing I'll say is, going back to Father Jerry again, he would often have described himself, and I think this is a great description for any person of any religion or no religion or any national, but he describes himself as a Christian with his L plates on, meaning, you know, like when you're learning to drive, you have these L plates on your car, so people know you are a learner. just give you a bit of space and, you know, be gracious to you. But he basically said, as he came in to meet someone, I have an L plate on. I have something to learn. It's not what I can offer you, but I want to learn. But wouldn't it be beautiful? Two people come in, both with the L plates on, meeting one another, and they'd be more quick to say, I want to learn about you, and hopefully you want to learn something about me. And that always stayed with me as I think a wonderful visual kind of thing. It was that as we enter in, we kind of come in with our L plates on.
Thanks. I want to come back to Colin's question about the common issues that faiths can work together on. And I want to turn to Juanita for maybe a little bit of an example of what Faiths Together for Climate Justice and Peace have been doing. The Join the Dots Together network. But before I do that, Naomi, I just want to check, maybe Bishop Brendan might want to come in and respond to some of the discussion at this stage.
Well, you know, I mean, well, first of all, thanks to everybody who contributed, and it's just interesting to hear the desire, I think, that's there to do something. Look, you know, as we're talking, one of the things that strikes me increasingly is that we all have to do our part to make sure polarizations don't set in at all levels. And unfortunately, that has happened now. And partly it happens not least because with social media, we can all inhabit our own little bubble, our own little world. And I think we all have to see what kind of micro projects can we do to help us move out of our little bubbles, because we all are in that. I mean, the algorithms are all the time prompting us to follow our own specific interests and line of thought. Whereas we really do need to offer opportunities to even as you know, they talk about the chaplaincy in universities, whatever it might be. But I mean, you've already given great examples yourselves in both Naomi and Peter already have given concrete examples of the kind of things that can happen. But I think all of us locally you know, can do our part, you know, to do even in the micro projects. We're counteracting what is all the time a trend that's beginning to emerge of polarization, be it in the form of racism and all this, but it's all polarization. And that's being reinforced by the social media that we have to counteract culturally. And I suppose people of faith communities, it's one of the aspects that we probably need to treasure more. And that is that we believe in community, and we believe in community relations. Now, of course, within our own communities, we've all the time to be making sure that our communities don't get closed in themselves. But at least we have in our DNA the desire to build community. And I just think these are good things that we're talking about this evening.
Thank you very much, Bishop. That's been really helpful. Peter, would you like to say something?
Yeah. A couple of things actually on what's been said, and including what Bishop has just said. I think one of the things that strikes me is, and it's that comparison with Bishop, how do you pronounce your Bud or Bud?
Colin. Sorry. Colin is here.
Yeah. I don't have as much certainty to know what I want for breakfast or dinner, never mind all of the big questions in the world. But how so many people can be so certain about everything just amazes me. And I think sometimes you get people who are certain and aggressive in how they communicate it that is not helpful. And her contribution just shouted out, and she didn't shout it, it was the compassion and the gentleness in which he chided the president that I think was so impressive. She spoke truth to power, but in a really empathetic way. And to me, that's more what any faith is about, listening and being empathetic and not being so certain that you're right and everybody else is wrong, because that just doesn't seem to me to be consistent with just about any faith in the world. But I wanted to say something about social media companies. I mean, 2 weeks ago, was it, in London, we had the second richest man in the world joining a rally, which was at its core, let's be generous to them, at its core was aggressive in its tone about some of these issues. Second most wealthy man in the world, who is very important in the world of IT and social media and everything else. And I just wonder how much of this is driven by a small number of very wealthy people with agendas. And I wonder if part of that, and part of it around City Cam as well, is about, we don't want regulation of our social media channels. I think they need to be regulated. I think they need to be able to do a lot more to prevent the sort of stuff that you see on some of these channels. Is that part of it? A very rich minority, very small number of largely white men who control these IT organizations, who want to make sure there isn't as much regulation as it should be. And if that's the case, I think we need to reflect on that as well. One final thing in Northern Ireland, it seems to me we also need to recognise some things around the statistics too. Statistics are horrible. But I wonder how much of this is, and I'm not justifying anything, that we as a society haven't yet dealt with some of our old fears within communities. That some of our communities are unsure where they are at and where this place is going. And when you add on top of that new fears around new arrivals coming into their communities, and they're being lectured and they're fearful because of what that means for their communities, layer the new fears on top of the old fears, and you create a dynamic which is really difficult to deal with. And I'm not making excuses for the statistics. What I probably would do is challenge whether our leaders have done enough to resolve the old fears and have been generous enough to each other to provide leadership to our communities to resolve those old fears. Because we're still living in a highly segregated city and environment. We're still living in a place locally where the communities that have been here for 30 or 40 years don't really know each other. And yet add to that new communities coming in. And I think that's something that we need to have a dialogue about, how everybody responds to that.
Yeah, just kind of goes on from something. And lots of the big issues. And when we talk about do you know what? So when we talk about the violence that happened, we often talk about working class communities that have been left behind. There are communities that have been that are poorer now than they were 30 years ago when we had peace. And we talk, I mean, I the last of the Troubles children, I was just I think 10 or 11 when the peace process started. So I remember the bombs, and anyone younger than me doesn't. And I remember how awful it was, and that sense of hope that everything was going to get better. But for a lot of people, it hasn't got better. And what we do have rich men, and it's not just about social media. We have, an industrial complex that profits from war. So for 20 years, it's profited from dehumanizing Muslims, because if you want to bomb countries, it's much easier to see them as subhuman. And that happened in Iraq, happened in Afghanistan, it's happening in Palestine, it's happened in Syria, it's happened in Somalia, it's happened in Bosnia. And that dehumanization has been happening for a very, very long time. And that flattening. So everybody in Northern Ireland knows that the conflict was not about transubstantiation in Northern Ireland, right? But when it's a conflict in a Muslim country, it's because of Islam. And there's no local politics, and there's no tribalism, and it's just Islam. And all these billions of Muslims, they're all the same. We have no distinction, even though there's cultural, there's religious, there's ethnic, there's financial differences between all these countries. Incredibly diverse and complex societies and politics. It's just reduced to Islam, and we've normalized that. So yesterday, when I saw the Minister of War, who's the former Secretary of Defense in America, put out a video with the Lord's Prayer, which we used to recite in school every day, 2 videos of weapons, of fleets of ships, of warplanes, of warships and torpedoes, I didn't go, oh, look at those Christians, because I have grown up around Christians. I grew up in a Christian family. I know and love Christians, and I know that that is not a reflection of Christianity. But there has been a vacuum about Muslims. So many people in Europe don't know Muslims, have never had a conversation with a Muslim. So whenever you get that decontextualized image of a Muslim going Allahu Akbar, it's something we say every day in our prayers, saying God is greater than whatever I'm going through. Suddenly that's scary, violent, and all Muslims are scary and violent. So we've been decontextualized. And that's why, you know, people aren't interested in conversation. But one of the things that so there are these deep pockets, what I was getting to. So if you look at like there's a spectrum of any opinion, there'll be that fringe on either side, they're the hardliners. Now on one side, at the moment, we have hardliners who have very, very strong opinions, but everybody else in the middle, they're persuadable. They're persuadable. At the moment, they may be heavily influenced by their algorithms, by their social media, by the people that are around them. But that doesn't mean that they can't be brought, they can't be changed. So these men have very deep pockets, and they are many men, sorry. Sorry to all the men in the room. But we have very shallow pockets, but if we add them together collectively, maybe one that can't match. We can't match the billions and millions and trillions of some of those guys, but it just, you know, we can add our shallow pockets together, and maybe that'll help us counteract the deep pockets of those guys.
But I think that's absolutely, it is I mean, I said this already, but I just find it extraordinary. The second richest man in the world, an advisor to the President of the United States, joined and spoke at a rally in London organised by Tommy Robinson. I mean, am I the only person that looks at that and goes, that's just extraordinary? Where are we whenever that becomes a normalized part of our civic debate? Would you have got that 10 years ago, 20 years ago? Really, it's just extraordinary.
I'm conscious of time, folks, and we need to move towards winding up. But I want to bring in Renita because Colin's question about faith communities coming together around things like climate justice, but other issues as well. I think Juanita can give a really good example of how, in a small way, the work that she has done has brought faith communities together.
Thanks, Edwin. It's lovely to be here tonight, and I wouldn't be here tonight if I hadn't met Edwin about 2 years ago. And the issue that brought us together is around climate justice. I was interested in doing something for Season of Creation. That's a Christian season. It's every September. It's about acting and praying for creation care. And because I started to kind of take an interest in that, one thing led to another, and I met the most wonderful people, which included Edwin and included Raja. And so I'm coming from a Christian background, and now I'm very at home here in the Baha'i Community Centre, the Windsor Hub. And we decided that for Season of Creation last year, 2024, we would have a conference. And I think that we call it Faith Together for Climate Justice and Peace. That was the name of our conference last year. So that's where I met Raja, who came along because the Catholic Church has a document which is 10 years old this year, which is Laudato Si. And we wanted to look at Laudato Si, but we wanted to look at other documents that other faiths have. So Raja very kindly came along to that conference, and he spoke about the Muslim document Al-Mizan. Following which, we had a little study group here, and we read Al-Mizan together, and that was really a fantastic experience. So it has led, there's no time to tell all the nuances about it, but through climate justice, we have got to know each other. We've got involved in holding events like tonight, and this is the fourth. We had one on work, we had one on economics, and we had one on migration. Because as well as doing all the things that each of us can do in our own lives, recycling, looking after the waste and what we buy. We need to really, we feel that we need to explore the avenues of economics. So it is about how you use your money, and voting, how you use your vote, politics. So to my surprise, our little group, which by the way, got the kind of nickname, Join the Dots Together, we found ourselves up in Stormont giving a presentation to the executive committee on what we have been doing. And, I never dreamt that would happen. So we've had lots of opportunities, too many to go into now. What I feel is that climate justice is something that we all care about, all faiths care about. It's not the only issue, but it is one that is very, very urgent in the world. And it's really important that we all get behind it and that we all use our voice. Some of us are going to Rome next week for the International Conference of Laudato Si, and that has an amazing lineup of speakers, and that is very focused on bringing a voice of faith to COP30. So I'm not an expert on COPs, but these COPs have been taking place over the years, and it seems that one is more disappointing than the other. So we really hope that with a growing faith input, COP30 will be a watershed and will make a difference. So now, that was my rant. Edwin, thank you.
And a great note to finish on. Thanks very much, Juanita. I'm going to invite you up there and thank particularly Bishop Brendan, Naomi, and Peter for wonderful comments and setting the scene for us and really leading us into a very interesting conversation. Colin's question is still hanging for me, in terms of what can the faith communities do in terms of coming together. And there's an enormous, it's a huge question, Colin. Maybe you and I can sit down and have a cup of coffee and talk about it someday. We definitely need to think about that and see what we can do. Thank you very much, everybody. This has been very good. Ed?
No, you could. I just want maybe to acknowledge Dublin City Interfaith Forum. I
Yes.
speak to Adrian and Father Pat.
Yes, indeed. We've been very pleased to be connected with the Dublin City Interfaith Forum in recent years. There are two members of the Dublin City Interfaith Forum that joined on Zoom. One is Adrian Christie and the other is Father Pat Colvin. And hello to you both, and thank you very much for joining us. And lovely to see you and everybody else that's on Zoom. We're just seeing a couple of faces. I didn't put the Zoom faces up during the meeting. We've just put them up just recently. Thank you, Navi, for your message. Thank you very much. Thank you, bye. From Zoom, but there is TV downstairs for the people in the room.